Welcome back to Endurance Icons, where we sit down with individuals crushing it in the wild world of endurance sports. Today on the podcast, we got Canadian 210 marathoner, two-time Olympian, ultra runner, and coach Reid Coolsaet. So welcome to Endurance Icons, Reid. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so what's on the training schedule for you today?
I'm going to run about 20K, I think, just a sort of regular run, which for me now, I just try to get a bit more elevation. And in Southern Ontario, it's not a ton, but instead of running to the trails, I'll bike or drive to the trails just to not waste any time running on flats anymore.
So I noticed a couple months ago, I think I'd seen on maybe your Strava or social media that you were dealing with some injuries, but it looks like you've had a good little build over the last little while.
Yeah, it's coming around. So I had an injury pretty much all last year that I was a bit of in denial with, just because I had some big races and fun races coming up, and I was getting away with training. Like most of my training, if not all, was doable. But then when I went to run far and hard, yeah, my pubic bone really hurt. So starting back in May, so I did end up doing Western States and a couple more races, and I ended up dropping out of JFK in November. And at that point, I just thought, it's not fun anymore to be running the way I was feeling. So I took time off, and I thought I'd take like 6 weeks off and it'd be good. But after 6 weeks, I tried a little run, and I could tell right away it was something similar to what I had back in 2014 when I ripped my abdominal muscle off my pubic bone. It wasn't nearly that painful as 2014, but it was the same like spot, same feeling. So I knew I had to take more time off, and I'm not as young as I was in 2014, and so I kind of thought, well, now I'm older, but it doesn't hurt as much. I'll just look at the same timeline. So I got an MRI lined up for like 14 weeks after I took time off, which was the same as back in 2014, where I got the go ahead. And then a week before that MRI, I fell skiing out west. Yeah, I thought I would try a 360, and I got 3/4 of the way around and just kind of landed on my hip. In the MRI, I was hoping that they would look at my left hip, but I was like, oh, they probably won't. But then I saw my doctor a week later, and he said, yeah, your injury looks good. There's just a bit of edema, nothing to worry about, but that will clear out. And then he's like, but what's up with your left hip? Like that's like it's way more inflamed, and your bursa is inflamed as well. So I've been dealing with that since, and that was at the end of February. So I guess like, what was it, like 12 weeks, almost 12 weeks, something like that. And it's still sort of lingering. So I have been able to build up since March, but it hasn't been smooth sailing.
But I'm super impressed that you were even attempting a 360. Like, have you landed those before?
Oh, yeah, I used to do them all the time. I used to ski a ton when I was in high school and in my early 20s. I used to ski race. So I used to ski like something like 60, 70 days a year. It was like my main thing. And in my head, I'm still there, but no, but physically I'm not the same skier as I was 20 years ago, unfortunately.
So back then you were doing like skiing and running kind of when you were younger coming up?
Yeah. So in high school, I definitely enjoyed downhill skiing more than running. And I used to always think I was running to get in shape for downhill skiing. But then as high school progressed, the downhill skiers kept on getting bigger, more muscular, and I pretty much just stayed the same. and then running I just got better towards the end of high school. And it was at the very end of high school where I did track. I hadn't done track like the first 3 years of high school. I just spent the spring and summer skateboarding, and then I was getting better at cross country and decided to do track the last 2 years. And that's when I got more serious about it. And then in university, I thought, oh, I'll run on the team. And first year at university, I really like kind of bought into, that was the first time I bought into like training pretty much all year round.
So what was the path once you went to university? What was your path from there to really making running like a full-time career for yourself?
Yeah, when I graduated university, I was at the point where I really did want to see where I could go with running, but I wasn't good enough to, approach a sponsor or get carded or anything like that. So I got a job at a bank working 25 hours a week, which was really good. It was actually a bank in Waterloo, and that allowed me to train in the morning, train in the afternoon, and yet, you know, um, get money to pay rent and stuff like that. And then so that would have been like 2003, 2004. And then in 2005, I made the world championship team for the 5K. And I went from 25 hours a week to basically like kind of part-time, like almost like a substitute teller. And but they would often call, but yeah, they would call in the morning, but I'd often be they'd ask me to work like all day. And so I was saying no a lot. Because before that, like the 5 hours a day worked really well. Like you're kind of working just like, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And they'd be like, oh, can you work like 8:30 to 5 or something? I was like, no. So they just after a while they're like, well, you're not really coming in. And by that point I did have a sponsor and I was carded. So I decided to go all in on running to try to make the 2008 Olympics. And that's kind of how I ended up running full time.
Nice. So you talked about kind of 2003 there getting in kind of the world championships for 5K. So was it like '03 to kind of '09 where you were really focusing on that shorter distance stuff? So was your goal for that first Olympics to try and make it in like 5 or 10K on the track kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. I was totally focused on the 5K. So yeah, like I said, went to like World University Games in '03, Worlds in '05, and then in 2007 I missed Worlds by 0.02 of a second in the 5K. And then in 2008 I actually got injured. So like the first injury I ever had, I slipped on ice and my I messed up my back and nerves. So I didn't run any outdoor track races in 2008. And when I was coming back in 2009, I had been cross training a lot, and that proved to be good for overall fitness and endurance. But my speed was far from where I would have wanted it to be. Um, so after a couple workouts, I think like late March, early April, I kind of knew that the marathon would suit me more. So it was about 6 weeks before the Ottawa Marathon. Um, I decided to switch to the marathon instead of doing track in 2009.
So I want to jump to like missing your goal by such a short margin. I love talking to people about the idea of resilience. How did you move on from that? Because I'm sure that was a big disappointment for you.
Yeah, it was like I earlier in the year I could have probably gone to Worlds, could have qualified for Worlds in the 10K, but I was just so focused on the 5K. I didn't bother going to nationals in the 10K. And just kind of put all my eggs in one basket for the 5. And yeah, ended up missing the standard by like you had to run 13:21.5 and I ran 13:21.52.
Oh, brutal.
Yeah. Like it's like, like inches kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And and so I didn't I yeah, like I just knew I had to pivot to another goal, right? Like if I just was like, okay, that's the end of the season, not going to Worlds, not doing anything about it, I just can't really do that. Because I'd been thinking that I was going to peak in August too. Like I didn't feel like it was the end of my season. So I had a couple of ideas. And the first one was to go to Falmouth and try to break 4 minutes for the mile, because the first mile I ever did on like a rubber track was 4 flat 0.08. And then the second one was like 4:01, and I never ran another mile again just because I was always running 1500s. And I ran 3:40 that year, which is equivalent to sub 4. So I was like, okay, like sub 4 is the goal. And I was excited about that, but I didn't get into the race. I think it was already full or something like that. So then just looking at Olympic qualification for next year, you can qualify in the 10K. And so I ended up getting into the Brussels, like it was at the time it was the Golden League, the Brussels 10,000 meter there. And so that was my focus. It was like mid-September race. And it wasn't worlds, but it was probably like the next best thing, just in terms of the quality of that field. Kenenisa Bekele was going for the world record in that race.
Cool.
The stadium, probably had like 50,000 people in it. Yeah, it was a really cool experience. In a few different ways. I got the start line. I was the only non-African born runner on the start line, and the paces that were set. I thought, oh, I'll try to run 27:30, but the slowest pace set was for 26 high.
Oh my.
So right off the bat, I was like, okay, I guess I'm I guess I'm just gonna do this alone. I was I think I was 209 at 800, and I was already off the back of the pack. So
Wow.
solo run after that. I knew I was going to get lapped by Bekele, because if he's going to set the world record, which was 26, I think he was aiming for like 26:10 or something like that. Even if I would have run 27:40, I'm getting lapped. So it was kind of inevitable. And then he did end up lapping me. There was a windy night, so he didn't get the world record. But his manager was still yelling at him to get the world lead. But he had been slowing down, and I'd been running alone. So I got in behind him, and I actually stayed with him, I think, for about 700 meters, which was really cool. But also a bit of like, I don't know, kind of amateur move or something. But like the announcer reminded everybody that I was in fact a lapped runner. I wasn't vying for second place, like or going for the win. And I didn't run that great. I was 28 low and didn't end up qualifying for the Olympics or anything like that. But it was a great experience, and that is how I sort of like pivoted from not going to Worlds.
So how was your first marathon experience then? So you said 6-week kind of lead in, and then it was at Ottawa you did?
Yeah, so I had a 6-week lead up. I didn't really know what I was going to be able to do, but I think the standard to go to Worlds that year was 2:18, and there was a couple other guys in the race who were also trying to get that standard. So it was a situation where if there were 3 of us under the standard, I had to make sure I was the top one. But as the race progressed, I ended up the other guys fell off, and I ended up running 2:17:09 and qualifying for Worlds. So then I had Worlds. I guess, was it like 3 months later? Because it was Ottawa was in the end of May, and then Worlds were in August. So yeah, my first marathon was like pretty quick build up, but got the job done. And then my second one was 3 months later, and I felt much more prepared for that one. Knew what to expect and all that kind of stuff. But it was a hot day at World, but I was really happy how I finished 25th.
Wow.
And so those 2 marathons for sure just like pointed me in the direction of the marathon as my number one focus from that point on.
So then this is pretty cool. Like you debut in 09, and then really in your first kind of Olympic cycle here, you made the 2012 games. So did you kind of, right as you started that marathon, have that like kind of new rejuvenation that, oh, here's my like new goal? Was that kind of the thought right away?
Yeah, I mean, if like not making the Olympics in 2008 was definitely like, it left a fire burning that I wanted to get back there, or wanted to get there. And just looking at my equivalent times in the 5K, 10K kind of pointed to something, where I could qualify in the marathon. The 5K and 10K are pretty cutthroat, right? I think now they kind of allow about 45 men, 45 women in the 5K field. And I think the 10Ks is somewhere around, there'd be 25 to 30, right? Mm-hmm. The marathon back in 2012, the field was about 160 for both the men and women. And it's been cut down drastically since then. So the standards were for the IAAF were a lot easier. But for Canada, they weren't much easier. It was 2:11:30 or 2:11:29, I should say. In 2012, but that was still around equivalent to my other times. So just knowing that the first 2 went fairly well for what I had done, it definitely was like an attainable goal. And yeah, my first real city marathon with a proper buildup, I ran 2:11:23. and kind of got that qualifying mark out of the way within 2010.
So the crazy thing about distance running is you came into the marathon and you debut at 22 or 2:17, and then the fastest you end up running is 2:10. I don't think people can appreciate like that is actually a huge improvement in distance running, like going from 2:17 to 2:10. But like, man, it seems like such a small margin when you just think about 7 minutes when an amateur person could go take like an hour off their marathon. So what were some of the things to run that kind of PB? I think it was in 2015 where you ran that PB. What were some of those key factors that allowed you to improve so much from that 217 down to that 210?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing too is like just when you take the 217 and look at the build up there, it wasn't really representative of what I could do. So even in 2009 for my second marathon, I really did think I was in like 213, 214 sort of shape, even though I ran 216, but it was hot. But if you're finishing 25th at Worlds, it's not far-fetched to think that somebody running 25th at Worlds should be able to run 213. So when I look at like that, like I kind of feel like that's sort of my improvement, like that 213, 214 ability down to 210. And it came with like increasing mileage, and then the workouts got longer. So just like incrementally building off of everything. And then it got to the point where I was doing too much, and I was seeing, of course you see like less improvement as, and then if you do too much, then you start seeing regression. So that's what kind of happened to me in a little bit it started in 2013, but definitely in 2014, where I was running 190K a week, sort of like peaking early on. And then it was like 200, 210. And then I was getting to like 230, 240, because more was better to a certain extent. And then in 2015, I actually dialed it back. So, my biggest workout in 2013 would have been like 29K at 305 per K. But then in 2015, it was 26K at 307 per K. So a little bit slower, a little bit less volume. And that just left me ready to race better. And so in 2015, I dialed things back a bit. And between, like I had a lot of my best races would have been in 2011, when I ran 2:10:55. So when I was still kind of, building up, and then 2012, 2020, 2013, 2014, like they weren't bad races. Like in 2013, I still ran 2:11, and in 2014 was I think my slowest city marathon of a kind of a 7-year period at 2:13. But then in Rotterdam, 2015, I ran 2:11 again, and then 2:10 at Berlin in 2015, and then at the end of 2016 ran 2:10 as well. So I kind of felt that by increasing my training and then a bit of trial and error, knowing where that limit is, and bringing it back, that I got into the right training zone.
Yeah, it was good. You definitely seemed to like learn where your sweet spot was over that time. So it's a good lesson for people that less isn't always more, but sometimes you need to do the trial and error to find that out. When you look back on your kind of road running career, is there anything you would do like kind of differently that you think might have been able to jump you into that 207, 208, 209 range when you look back on it?
I don't think so. I mean, of course, if I had the perfect like race, like, not to make excuses, but like Berlin, I was doing a lot of leading, when I ran 2:10. In Toronto in 2011, it was really windy when I ran 2:10. If you look at what the other guys I was racing with on that day were able to do half a year later, it was a few minutes faster. So it's, if everything had come together, but it's almost like too much to ask. Like, even when I look back, kind of at my marathoning between 2010 and 2016, I actually think I was quite lucky. Like, I didn't, most of the times I ran with like, it was windy sometimes, but it was pretty good weather. And also I was really healthy. So from 2017 to 2021, like that like the next sort of chapter, and maybe it can coincide with having kids and going to like daycare and stuff, but like I was getting sick a lot more, and I had some weird, like bit more injuries in there. So once I kind of went through the period of like, being sick for races and having like just like weird things pop up. I look back at 2016 and before and think I actually did get really lucky with a lot of the weather and just my buildups. Like so many were flawless. The ones where I did get injured, I got injured far enough in advance that I just postponed the race completely. Like one time I fell off my bike, broke my collarbone, and instead of doing Toronto, I did Fukuoka, which was like 6 or 7 weeks later. So I was able to just pivot like way earlier, and instead of having that like little injury that you think you're going to try to get through, kind of like what I did last year, and then the races are just, they all just go subpar. So things really did line up well. I can't complain.
So you mentioned that you were doing like sometimes, yeah, upwards of 200 plus K a week. And that's obviously takes a crazy demand on your body from like both the recovery standpoint and like nutrition. So what were some of those like training non-negotiables that allowed you to really be able to continue to perform at that level from really like a outside of training perspective?
Yeah, so I've always just been really big on sleep. I just always prioritize it. So I have good sleeping habits, good eating habits. I've always just had a good relationship with food and eating a lot and eating the right stuff, eating tons of bad stuff too, but make sure I get the right stuff in first, protein shakes after. So just like really good habits. And then, you know, a lot of it's like, I think a lot of it's still sort of luck, like genetic luck about just being able to withstand a lot of training. So yeah, I did have some injuries, but I also had, but in between my big injuries, I did have long periods of uninterrupted training, which goes a long way, right? Like if you can be consistent month after month for a couple of years, you're going to be able to run your best.
Cool. Before we move on to kind of your next chapter in trail there, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. So we've seen over the last couple of years some really like huge performances in that Canadian distance running. So like half and full marathon records falling on kind of the men's and women's side. What do you kind of chalk some of that up to? It's like a new era with super shoes and there's some training advances in there. What do you chalk up some of those big improvements? Like you obviously paved the way and probably inspired a lot of these people, which is probably cool to look at as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited for the new crop of distance runners, and I say new crop, but like Melindy is like we've
Yeah.
been working together like for a long time. I think we were on a national team together back in like 03 or something like that. But yeah, of course it's the talent, and you can't ignore the super shoes either, right? But you know, things that are relative would be looking at placings, right? Look at Melindy finished 9th at the Olympics. Natasha was 13th. It's an even playing field now with the super shoes. So that's 9th and 13th at the Olympics, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what that is. You know, and if you look at Eric Gillis, finishing 10th at the Olympics, you know, the super shoes do a disservice because some people might say, oh, he's a 211 guy, you know, but and then where these you know, like the new crop, like I don't think anybody was in the top like 40 at the Olympics from the guy side. And I, you know, between Dylan, Eric, and I think I had the worst placing at 27th at my first Olympics. So sometimes I just kind of look at that to like kind of compare. Now, of course, like with Cam's running, it's just, you know, you can't compare. It's just, he's just so fast, right? Like I always kind of thought he would kind of run in the 207 range, like before he ever ran a marathon, maybe even faster, just looking at his 10K time. And then of course now with the super shoes, like 205 makes sense, right? Like 207 with old shoes would not have surprised me at all with Cam. And so 205, like, yeah, it's to me, like for myself, it's mind boggling, but looking at Cam and what he's been able to do throughout his career, it makes sense that he's running 205. And if he runs 204, I'm also not going to be shocked. Like, he's just that good. And then the other thing too is like the depth is better, right? Like we never had 4 women or 4 men have the Olympic standard and somebody have to sit home. And we saw that at the last Olympics. Tristan had the Olympic standard and didn't go. Rachel Cliff did as well. So like we have more depth. It's undisputable. And the top end, if you look at places, it's also better. Cam finishing, like came finishing fourth at Worlds, and yeah, it's just a whole other level, really.
So it's one thing I find really cool in this day and age is like you can follow somebody like Cam on Strava and literally see all his training. When you were coming through, did you know really what some of your competitors were doing like that? And like, how do you think that plays a factor in like his competitors? Like what's your making of the open data that's out there these days?
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, it's interesting. Cam doesn't put everything up on
Yeah.
Strava, which is like fine. Some people don't put anything up, right? Yeah, back when I was training, yeah, it was always just conversations, right? And then you'd hear, um, but when someone would say they're running 200K a week, it often didn't mean they're running 200K a week. It often meant like, their peak weeks were 200, right? So if you actually average, everything you heard, you almost had to take with a grain of salt too,
Yeah.
right? And especially for GPS watches, right? So before GPS watches, and you hear somebody doing, they did their 10-mile tempo at blah, 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 because they finished on the track and they timed their last 400 and extrapolated their whole run off of that. It's like, well, they, you can always finish fast, right? So, yeah, there's a lot more mystery back then. And yeah, whereas now you kind of know, like, you can kind of see how these sessions are going and what people are doing. And yeah, what Cam's doing is quite incredible. He does have a good following on Strava now, but about a year ago, maybe a bit more, he was posting stuff on Strava, and there's very few followers, and I was almost like, people do not realize like what's going on here. Like, he is ready for something big. It was quite exciting to see.
Yeah, I was hearing something about him doing like 3 runs a day on some days. Did you ever do like triple run days or just a lot of doubles?
No, I never really, I don't think I ever did a triple on purpose. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, I would, I mean, I would double a lot. I often ran 12 or 13 times a week was kind of what I would do a lot.
Did you have like a favorite session for your like marathon prep blocks that you did?
Not really. I kind of liked it all, like longer tempos, like longer stuff at marathon pace. Was probably it was the most specific, and I could probably read into it the most, but then I would want to complement it with fast Ks or something as well. So it was definitely like the whole mix.
And outside of the terrain, when you made the switch to trail running and really added that in, did your sessions change significantly?
Yes, yeah, they did a lot. I mean, the main stuff should kind of be the same, of just getting fit. So like a lot of stuff, like a lot of lactic threshold work, right? Whether you're doing the 5K or marathon or up, like, you just need to get fit. So those are probably like the most similar. But then I also went to trail running to do something completely different. So I might not be training the best way to improve my fitness. Like, some days I know I probably should be doing some sort of workout, like 5 times 8 minutes with a couple minutes rest, but then I'll just go and run in the trails and go by feel. And that's just where I'm at right now.
Was trail running always the plan?
Yeah. I've always liked trail running. I didn't really know the extent of how technical and steep like trail running can be. I was doing I was doing local trail runs for a long time, like Run for the Toad and Sulphur Springs and stuff like that, which are quite runnable. They're much hillier than most runs I would do training for a marathon, but they're not that hilly compared to even my first ultra when I went to Quebec there, and not nearly as technical as well. So that was a bit of a surprise, but I've always wanted to do longer distances and always wanted to do more on the trails. But every event that I got into, I did it longer than I thought I would. So I thought I would start marathoning earlier, but the 5K was going so well that I thought I would see it through to 2008. And then same thing with the marathon. The 2012 Olympics, I was in great shape for, and it wasn't a disaster, but I was like, oh, I know I can do better. And so from that point on, I was just like, okay, I'm going to get back to the Olympics in 2016 and have a good one. And then after that, I was thinking about going to the trails in 2018. So in 2017, I had this real plan to start doing trail races, but I hadn't done Boston yet. So I thought, okay, I got to do Boston. And then after that, it wasn't that long until you could start qualifying for the 2020 Olympics. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to go to trails for like half a year and then try to qualify again. So that it just kind of like, I just kind of stuck around each event a bit longer just because of goals that were pulling me in that direction.
And you mentioned Western States earlier. What was it like to run that race, and how did it compare to the other significant challenges that you've had in running?
Yeah, Western States is a really cool race. It's got great vibes, and it's not a huge field. I think it was about 380 people in the race, which is kind of surprising for I guess the hype around it and everything, right? Like it sounds like I always thought it was a bigger race than it was. But yeah, the course is just really cool. Everything about it, I just really liked. The course is very challenging. It's a bit chilly in the beginning, then it gets really hot. There's enough aid stations on Western State that you don't actually have to carry a ton of stuff, which is a bit different than a lot of the other ultras. And I mean, I guess my experience there was I kind of knew going in that it was going to be really tough for me to run much after like 100K. So I ran 125K fairly well, and I was pretty happy where I was at that point, and hoping that I was going to keep improving. But that's kind of when things went, like, they got really tough for me. And I would definitely say, like, from 130 to 160K, that I think most of it was walking for me. Yeah, it was like, it took me 5 hours the last 30K. So must have been like, at least that's how I remember it, like a little bit of jogging here and there. So it got really tough. And I mean, part of it is my first ultra was in August of 2021, and then less than a year later, I'm running 100 miler. So probably a bit quick to make that jump up, with Stoked Oats giving me the spot. They saw me win my first ultra, and then it's like, it's kind of a big unknown, like how it would go. So maybe it was a bit of a gamble to give me the spot, but I mean, I think they were happy with it. But by the time race day came around, it was like, I had these different visions from the fall of 2021 to where I would be like by the end of June 2022. And part of me was like, yeah, like, if I just, if it's a more runnable course, I can, use my marathon speed, maybe, like, be in the top 10, stuff like that, be up there. And then after I did a couple 100Ks earlier in the year, the writing was on the wall that things were getting pretty tough for me after 80K. Yeah, so that was Western States.
How did you manage your mindset over that 30K?
I just kind of I was still enjoying it, like, and I just knew I was going to finish, right? Like, unless there was a disaster, like I fell and really hurt myself or something like that, like, just knowing that I got that spot, like a sponsored spot, I wasn't gonna just like not finish the race and be like, well, that was fun. Like, I was gonna get it. So I was still, I guess, just like motivated and to keep moving. But, and I don't know, I don't know how much, like, I could have like run faster, even if I was in a position. So, like, if I was going for a top, like, if I had a chance at top 10, I finished 17th. If I had a chance at top 10, I think there would have been more in there to like make that last 30K faster. But I'm almost glad I wasn't in that position, because I don't know that there was much I could have done, and it would have hurt a lot. So part of me was like, okay, like, I'm gonna have an okay race here. I'm gonna finish, like, just get the job done. And it was dark at that point too, for the last maybe like 10, 20K. And so that was a bit of a challenge, and just negotiating some technical terrain on really tired legs. Like it was challenging like the whole way through, and keeping my stomach like good. And at the end, so there's just a lot of stuff to like keep my mind going to and overcome, despite not being like super excited about the competitive aspect by that point.
And you mentioned using the aid stations. What have been the most significant changes in like sports nutrition, switching from road racing to trail racing?
Definitely like the duration of these races. So my first ultra, I thought I would fuel just like I did my marathons, right? So I was using endurance tap, and sometimes like even with the marathon, like endurance tap was my main thing, but sometimes I also have like some other sports drink, or even like flat Coke. And I'm like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. Like I'll aim for the same amount of carbs per hour, but we'll just do it for 16 hours or 14 or whatever it's going to be, right? And then 6 hours in, I realized that just having maple syrup over and over and over again is too much. And yeah, at some point I got to an aid station, and it was getting hot, so I thought, okay, I need to hydrate. I should keep putting calories in. So I didn't take any water. It was just all just like aid station stuff. So it's just like, Pepsi and sports drink and endurance tap and whatever else I was putting in. And then I just started puking like a couple minutes later, like
Oh
everything.
no.
And I knew if I didn't get my stomach right, I wasn't going to finish the race. So I had to walk for a few K. But that's really when I learned, like, okay, variety is best. And also not just yeah, in 2 hour runs, I can do chews and gels and all that stuff. And it's fine, like 3 hours, heck, even 4 or 5. But after that, like just having like kind of processed sweet stuff, it just like, I just can't stomach it anymore. So yeah, by Western states, I was eating like bananas were one of the main go-to, and some other like maybe like watermelons as well. But bananas seem to like kind of fill me up a little bit, and they go down well. So, and of course I was like always drinking like a sports drink at the time, and taking gels here and there, but I wouldn't just rely on that stuff like I could easily do in a marathon.
Yeah. What's the wildest thing that you've eaten in a race?
Oh, it's nothing crazy. I don't even think I have a good story. And most ultra runners do. But for me, I would say, like, this is gonna sound boring. It was like a quesadilla at like, I don't know, like mile 90.
I
Sounds
don't know.
delicious.
It does, and also cheese in a race actually is pretty wild. So we'll give it to you, Reid.
Yeah, but apparently it's like it's pretty normal. But yeah, like I would always hear people having quesadillas. I'm like, why is that a thing? And then I sat down, and I was really hungry, and I had been walking for a while, right? So once I walked, my
Mhm.
stomach had
Yeah.
kind of settled, and I was like, yeah. I think the aid station before that, I had chicken broth, and
Okay.
that went down really well, because actually before that my stomach wasn't great, and then I had like, yeah, I had some like warm chicken broth, and it was like went down so well, and it really like gave me new life.
hmm And so you talked about earlier injuries. Injuries during this sort of trail running era. What have they sort of been, and outside of your most recent ones, and how are you handling that? What sort of cross training do you do?
Yeah, so when I was injured during my competitive marathon career, I would pool run and go on the elliptical, and do a ton of it. Now, I think I burnt myself out. I think I was listening to your podcast with Ben Flanagan, and he kind of
Yeah.
said the same thing. Like, and I was like, I remember that mindset. I was
Yeah.
putting in a ton of minutes, and I was happy to do it and motivated to do it. But then in 2017, I got injured, um, and I was doing a bit of pool running, a bit of elliptical, and then I was like, no, I was like, hands, I'm done.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of rested, and then that injury, it was like I had a bone in my foot, basically dies, a necrotic bone, so I had to like
Oh.
reheal. It's like one of my metatarsals.
hmm
It was getting bashed by the toe. It was a very weird injury. Uh,
hmm
but then we went back. My wife's from Halifax. We went and visited Halifax, and she used to do triathlons, and I got her triathlon bike. We're like the same height. So then I took that home, and then I started cycling. So I started cycling in 2017, and I cycled for like 6 weeks straight. and really enjoyed it. So now when I get injured, I'll bike. This year when I was injured, I didn't run at all. Second half of November, December, and January, and February. So I had to be on an indoor bike, and my appetite for indoor biking is much less than outdoor biking. So I was anywhere from 2 to 9 hours a week, which I think 9 hours a week is a lot for me on an indoor bike, but 2 hours isn't much at all. So a lot of weeks around 4 or 5 hours, and that's kind of my go-to. And I still try to bike like once a week. Now I like road biking. When I'm running though, I'm like, it's okay. When I'm not running, I really like it. Like I really get into it. But if the trails are in good condition, I'd much rather run.
Yeah.
For our listeners, this was not casual riding Reid was doing. I could see him on Strava just tearing up all the KOMs in the Hamilton area there.
To the
So
surprise of no one.
the interesting part was when I went out to Halifax, my father-in-law was like, do you want to do a ride? We'll go to Peggy's Cove and back, right? So it was a 100K ride. And this point, my father-in-law is also a grandpa, right? Like I have a 1-year-old son. So in my head, I'm like, okay, grandpa's doing 100K rides. So when I got back to Hamilton, my first week was like 700K. Because I just thought, okay, 100K rides are like kind of normal. And then, a couple of my friends had cycled. They're like, they messaged me like, what are you up to, man? Like, that's a lot of biking. And I was like, so then I kind of like, would tone it down between 5, but I think I did a couple more weeks around 700, but like 500-kilometer weeks and stuff like that. So, I was doing a lot.
Reid and I were laughing before the podcast. Because we're talking about the Giro and Derek G and all the breakaways right now, and Reid was dueling with him for all the KOMs. So maybe that's your calling, a world tour cyclist. Mike Woods did it, right? Running to cycling.
Well, no, I was not dueling with Derek G. He during the pandemic, when he was not on the track, he turned on his Strava and just crushed all the KOMs. A good friend of mine who Jeremy Ray, he'd run 3:36 for the 1500. Him and Derek G were battling each other. Quite a different level than I'm at.
Well, looking to this year, what are the big goals on the horizon for you?
Yeah, given my injury earlier in the year, I kind of made my big goals for September and November. So the 2 races that I'm really gunning for are Pikes Peak Ascent, which is mid-September. It's like an uphill race in Colorado, 21K. It's part of the Golden Trail Series, and then JFK in November. So JFK is still a bit of a question mark to see if like how my training progresses, and if I think the course suits me well. I just don't know if I'm there with the distance. It's a 50-mile race, so can I be competitive over 80K? Hopefully, I'll know a bit more come like September, October. Super excited about Pikes Peak. There are a few races I would have liked to have done this year. 3 of them are on the same weekend. So the NACAC Trail Championships, like the North American Trail Championships, are in Saskatchewan the same weekend as Pikes Peak, and the World Master Trail races, like Trail Championships, are also that same weekend. So like 2 other races that I may have considered, they're all on the same weekend. So Pikes Peak, definitely the most competitive of those races. So I feel that I should do that one sooner than later, and maybe put off like Masters for like future years. And then my first race that I'm going to do that I don't really have high expectations for is QMT 25K, which is July 2nd, which is only I guess 6 weeks away now. And I don't feel ready at all for it. But I know a lot can happen in 6 weeks, so I'm just gonna have an open mind. But I think it will be a fun race, and it will be a good rust buster. Even if I'm not like feeling like I'm in good shape for it.
Totally. And you're such a versatile athlete. So we talked about you skiing. You've had an incredible career road running, cycling. You dropped skateboarding earlier, and now trail running. When you look to a longer horizon, what's sort of undone for you? What are your sort of larger goals in the future? Anything you're going after?
Yeah, great question. I don't really know. I still like have interest in the longer distances, the 100K and 100 mile. Um, and I would like to do those again, not injured. So my very first ultra, I was able to run the whole way. Not fast at the end. My last 20K were like quite pitiful, and I was walking up every single hill, but I was running.
Mhm.
But that wasn't the case last year, and I was almost like I didn't almost didn't understand. I'm like, well, now I'm like doing longer runs. Like my train's more, geared towards it. But I think the injury played a big part in that. So I do want to like experiment with the longer distances again, and just see how they go. Uh, I'm not like, I don't know. I guess I have to see how it goes
Mhm.
before I really commit to saying like, yes, I want to do another 100 miler. But it is in the back of my mind. And the other thing too is, now that I've done those races and I look at some of the sort of like sub ultra um, uh, races like that, those I guess before I was into ultra running, I would just look at some of the big races to get all the hype. It was a lot of the 100 mile races. But now that I'm like more into and exposed to trail running, I get just as excited about some of these like sub ultras as I do like the longer stuff. So I don't really, it's a really bad, I don't really have like a concrete answer. There's nothing like really burning, except for like, I guess Pikes Peak, and we'll see how that goes.
Sometimes you just got to let it come to you and you'll know when it's time.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool. So changing gears a bit, I'd love to talk a little bit about your coaching. I've definitely seen an explosion of Coolsaet Go kits at a bunch of races coming up, and seems like you guys are cranking out some awesome results from Coolsaet Go and Bayfront Endurance that you're running both of those. So when did you actually start coaching, and kind of what do you love about it?
Yeah, I started coaching over 10 years ago. Just randomly people would ask me to like kind of help them out with races, like some friends who were like, sort of into running. And then I started really coaching some runners, yeah, about 10 years ago. And then just word of mouth. They would say like, "Oh, would you also coach my friend?" And I guess between maybe 2013 and 2019, I would usually coach about 10 athletes. Um, Not much more than that. And I've always wanted to know more about my own training, so I took a lot of initiative and figured like trying to figure things out and experiment and talk to other people, especially when I go to Kenya. It was kind of like this melting pot of runners from all over the world living in the same sort of like hotel, and you'd be sitting having every single meal with them, right? So you might just sit down and talk to Suguru Osaka, and Mo Farah was there a lot, like a lot of really top runners, and then just a lot of Europeans who were um like making the Olympics, but names you wouldn't be familiar with, and just hearing how they train. So like I just really got into listening to what other people were doing, and it's what can I implement into my training, what works. And then when I was coaching athletes, it was the same sort of thing. It was just like, looking at their training plan, looking at the calendar, and putting everything, like just tinkering and thinking about different scenarios. Really looking at the big picture. Like look 2 years down the road, where do they want to be? And so what do they need to do in the next 6 months to get there? So I just really enjoyed it. And yeah, as the years went by, I kind of just figured that at some point I would make coaching my career. And then in 2020, all appearance fees and prize money and sponsor went away. So basically, at the end of 2019, I knew at that point that the Super Shoe was my only ticket to the Olympics. I could tell I was getting a bit slower. So I tried out the Nike Super Shoe, and I could run the paces that I had previously been doing. Um, and New Balance was still at that point in a prototype for their Super Shoe. And so I had to make a decision like, um, you know, of course, hindsight, like the Olympics never happened then, but at the very beginning of 2020 or end of 2019, I thought I had like 4 months to put in like an Olympic qualifier, and so I decided, I'm like, well, if it's going to happen for me, I'm going to switch. So yeah, so then all races stopped. So I had zero income coming in. And then decided by August that I should actually let people know that I coach, and they could approach me, and then we could figure out if it works. So from August of 2020, it's really grown. And there was still like people like going to the Coolsaet go.run and filling out. But then once races came on, people really wanted to get coached. And at that point, I'd been coaching Krista for a couple of years, and she had been coaching a few people, and she wanted to get into it. And she's got the right personality to coach, and she's got a ton of experience. And she, once she like, put her mind to like looking at periodization and different workout structures, and of course how to make coaching relative to all athletes, because that's one thing sometimes elites like aren't great at or haven't done before, is they just think, okay, I used to do 10 times 800. I'm going to give that to this athlete. And then it's like, well, no, they're running their 800 like a minute slower. So that's a lot more work kind of thing. Right. So it's things like that. And then the other athlete, the other coach that works with me is Jordan Bierma. So Jordan's been coaching for a while as well. I've known Jordan for probably since like 2010. He was a junior. He was sub 15 5K runner. And then he got into the trails before I did, doing ultras, and he coached, and he was the manager at a running store. So I also ran all their clinics. And we would just like have coffee and like chat about coaching and stuff like that. And then like I said, as races came back onto the calendar, especially at the end of 2021, I was just getting inundated with requests. And so I asked Jordan, I was like, well, look, these people asked me, like, would you want to take them on? And he was like, yeah. So then we just sort of like, made that official. And then once I got into ultras, people started asking me to coach ultras. And I'm like barely one step ahead of like, like what they're doing. Oddly enough, I started coaching an ultra runner in 2017, only because he wanted to get faster. He was an pure ultra guy. He wanted to get faster at the half marathon. Started coaching him, but then he had more opportunities to he went to worlds for mountain running. So he still wanted to be coached by me. And I was like, but I don't know anything like about racing, for longer than 3.5 hours. But I was like, I'm willing to kind of look into it. So he was like a good experiment. I look back at some of that stuff I was giving to him, and I surprised myself that some of it was good advice, and others other stuff I'm like, I probably wouldn't do that anymore. But yeah, so now that I got into ultras, people have been asking me for ultras. And I think, for people that live in Southern Ontario, I do have a pretty good idea of how to try to train for, races out west, races in Quebec, where the terrain is much more challenging. But then when I was at Canyons last year, Dave Stevens, he's won Run Rabbit Run before. I think he's finished second at Javelina. He won UTMB Mexico last year. I chatted with him at Canyons about training, and I learned a lot we were staying at the same hotel. He's from Nelson, BC, and over the course of the weekend, I learned so much from him. He's a coach himself, but being in Nelson, in the small town, and he maybe just doesn't have the same exposure. But so some people would start asking me about coaching 100 milers and whatnot. I'm like, do you want to walk the whole thing? I know to do that, So yeah. So I started sending people over to Dave. So Dave's kind of like when somebody requests a coach, and they have access to mountains, and also he'll coach people in Ontario as well. But like people who want to race 100 milers, like that's their main focus, especially the rugged ones. He's got the experience, both coaching and as an athlete. So that's the coaching roster, and it's going well. And I think we're still getting requests, but and it's a bit of a wait list, but I don't ever want to be an administrator. I still want to coach. So I think we're going to just keep it pretty small.
Man, what a great coaching crew you have there. So when people come to work with like yourself or your team there, what are some of the key kind of coaching philosophies or kind of pillars of performance they can expect you guys to be delivering?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like a lot of coaches say this, but the first thing that always has to come is health, right? So yeah, you have to be healthy. Put that as your main priority. And then the second one would be enjoyment. So you have to enjoy what you're doing. You can't just be doing like you'll get burnt out if you're just forcing things. And then the third one's performance. And I'll always say, like, you want performance to be really good. Well, it's not going to, you're not going to hit top performance if 1 and 2 aren't in place anyways. So that would be like our underlying philosophy, like, to start with. And then the next one, it would be like, I guess, individualization, right? So there's no, like when somebody comes to me and they're like, how many kilometers do I need to run a week to run X in the marathon? I'm like, well, what have you done up to this point, right? If you've been running 70K a week, I'm not going to say, okay, you got to run 120K a week to run 255, right? So it's individualization, super important, and not just using like a cookie cutter sort of like workout schedule. So getting to know the athletes, like a preliminary Zoom call, yeah, even like a 30-minute chat, you can learn quite a bit about somebody. And then just having like open dialogue all the time. So I just like, now that I coach a lot of athletes, like I'm coaching about 40, I don't like it's hard. It's almost hard for me to like I can't just like text each one like, hey, how's it going? Right? Because most of the time they'll be like, it's fine, like, don't bother me, I'm busy, So I always just have this kind of rule, like, if anything's up, you have to let me know right away, right? And that's just, and that works out really well. So if someone's got a tight low back, it's like we can deal with that and figure out how to change things up right away, rather than letting it go too long.
I find it so interesting. I love that you lead with health. And it's such a, like, when you look at the coach and athlete relationship, it is a relationship built on trust. I'd love to know, like, what are some of the checks and balances that you put in place? Like you say, a Zoom call, what are your tells, and how do you ensure that health is that pillar before you even start working with your athletes?
It's actually quite difficult because runners, like, I'll have runners do a race and then afterwards tell me like, oh, I was actually kind of injured, but I didn't want to tell you because I don't know you wouldn't let me race. I'm like, oh,
all the time. I get you.
but and that's just kind of like, you do, like, you have to just deal, like, that's just runner mentality. So like, hopefully, like, I can tell examples of when that does not work and they'll like heed my advice. But most of the time it does, right? Like, I'll have athletes not have a good marathon and they're like, okay, I want to run a marathon, like, and like, this marathon's coming up in 2 weeks.
An emotional marathon, we call those.
Yes. And I was like, okay, the chances of that working, like, that might work. And you might knock it out of the park, but the downside is like, there's a big risk in that you might get injured and you're going to miss more training. And that marathon that you could set up properly 6 months from now is going to be compromised. Right. So sometimes it's just having those conversations and having people look at the big picture and kind of like calm down and do things. Yeah. Like just be very practical about it. Yeah, there's just a lot of like interesting conversations I've had over the course of the, like, especially last few years of, letting people like dropping a goal race, right? Which is super hard. But I always know, like, once people do that, because if they're, like, say they're injured, they always feel better afterwards. It's the unknown that's really the thing that kind of messes with people's head, that's stressful. So I always say, like, it's nice to have a goal, but if you are stressed about getting ready for that goal because your body's not cooperating, then you take that one off the table and put another one in like 6 months. So, like, keep the motivation there, but have it all just be like motivation and not stress. So a lot of times it's just having that conversation that's tough. And then it's usually like the next day, the athlete's like, okay, I feel much better about, where I'm at right now. And without that stress, they'll probably heal faster from the injury anyway. So it's usually the way to go. There's always more races out there.
So one thing I find in my coaching, and I got it a lot, it's funny, after the marathon, and we are working with a number of triathletes here, is around the like weight conversation. Do you have a lot of athletes who are coming to you of like, when say they have a bad race or they're looking to optimize performance, they're like, hey, I think like a key target of mine is losing weight to get faster. Like, how do you approach those conversations to make sure that they're doing it healthy and not getting injured?
Yeah, that's a good one. So, yeah, I mean, I never bring up weight to my athletes, and if they do, if it's something that I think that they could work on, then I send them to Rachel Hanna, because she's a
Mhm.
great
Mhm.
uh, nutritionist, is a registered dietitian, I should say, and she understands running. I think I've had quite a few of my athletes work with her, and every single one has had great things to say. Um, I'm not a physiotherapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nutritionist, all these things. So even though I have my own experience and I can give some sort of like direction, I don't pretend to be an expert in any of those areas. So if someone's hurt, I can say, oh, like, yeah, I had something similar. Like, these are the exercises that have helped me, but you should see a physiotherapist, or,
Mhm.
you should see a chiropractor or see a doctor. So as far as weight goes, like, um, I believe that most athletes aren't fueling enough. So
Mhm.
that's usually where I go first. And that if they are worried about weight, it's often if they're coming off of a time of like either rest or not as much training. And I just say, like training, if you're training the amount that we've prescribed, like, you're gonna find like a natural race weight. But don't try to get there any sooner. Like, don't like, you'll get there. Don't try to force it by restricting calories, because um it never works in the long run, like, ever. So yeah, good. And which goes back to health and also enjoyment too, right? Like,
Mhm.
um and I mean, I tell my athletes, I never step on a scale. I did have to step on a scale once this year, because my wife was convinced our luggage was going to be over, like, over. She's like, you have to weigh that, right? And like, I got it out, and when we were going out west skiing in February, and so I had to, like, and I just couldn't, it just wouldn't balance the leg, so I had to like weigh myself, and then like weigh, so I was like, oh wow, I'm like, this is like the first time I've like been on a scale for a couple of years. So um it's nice once you put it out of your mind and you just focused on like eating well, and like knowing that food is fuel. It's, you can get into the right mindset, where you can kind of put that to the side. Hopefully, I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously, but there are things that, I can, some advice I can give, I guess.
No, it's totally true. And shout out to Rachel Hanna. I've worked with her in the past, and she's just super professional and has so much knowledge, because I always find it helpful to work with someone who is an athlete themselves. They understand. We were just talking to Lucy Bartholomew when you were talking about most people under fuel. And I think she gave me my favorite quote when it comes to fueling as an athlete, where it's too much sometimes, too little never. And I'm like, I think that needs to be a tagline for all endurance athletes. Um, but switching gears, just before we wrap up, you mentioned, getting sick from your kids. What is it like to, balance coaching, and be a professional runner, and also have kids? How do you balance that with two very small children?
Yeah, I mean, and I would say I would use professional runner loosely these days,
Yeah.
but
You run a lot.
uh yeah, I do. I still do training quite a bit. Yeah. So I mean, first off, like, my wife is super supportive, right? So she's a runner herself. She's signed up for the Berlin Marathon this fall, and so she understands. And she comes out to every Bayfront endurance workout that we put on Tuesday nights. Um, so that's one. I don't think it would work or be easy to work with a partner who's doesn't understand. And then yeah, and just working around like that schedule. So when she's doing her runs, when I'm doing my runs, and then with coaching, it's very flexible, right? So I'm often doing stuff in the morning with the kids, and like school drop off, pick up, and stuff like that. And then I do most of my run in the middle of the day. So I'll carve out a couple hours for running, and then a couple of hours for coaching, and then I feel like that's the whole day, and I'm back to the school to pick up kids. And then sometimes in the evenings too, right? Just like kind of piecing it around. Um, I I use like this app called Calendly, which it makes
Yep.
life pretty easy for my athletes booking in Zoom calls or phone calls. Um, and then I for sure I don't train as much as like I could, just as far as my physical capacity, just because I'm tight on time, but I'm just at the point in my career where I'm happy with the amount I'm training, and it works well with family.
So who's your endurance icon, Reid?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I guess it's changing all the time. I would say, for a long time, like Sylvia Ruger, because like her 228 back when she ran in like the early 80s was quite amazing. Or I guess I should say mid 80s, but and yeah, and her like finished the Olympics like just relatively, like it was just so good. And then also just because she was still involved with in sport, like I would see her at races every once in a while. She gave me great advice about coming back from injury, and stuff like that. So I think that, because like when you come up with a marathoner in Canada, there's Jerome Drayton and Sylvia Ruger, who had the records lasted for so long, but I only got to meet Jerome Drayton once, so he didn't really have as much of an impact on me. But now that I've moved into trail running, I appreciate Killian Jornet a lot more. So he's like one of the best 100-miler runners ever, and maybe Courtney DeWater's like similar, but he's also really good at the sub ultra stuff. So he's won Sierra Zinal and Zagama. I think he's got maybe records that I think maybe he does sell the record at Sierra Zinal. Like these are like 21, like Sierra Zinal, like a 21K race, right? Like, and once I started racing over technical terrain, I realized how not good I am, but then also started appreciating how fast some people are. And just the fact, like just watching him like just crush these technical downhills is quite amazing. So to have that skill and then the running skill and just his outlook on life and stuff is really cool. And then of course, like the current crop of Canadians, especially Mo and Cam and Melindy and Natasha, and people who are like finishing top 10 in the world in the Olympics or close to. It's really cool to see.
So who do you got at Canada's 10K championships next week, Cam or Mo?
That's a really good question. I mean, now that Cam's more focused on the marathon and Mo, so yeah, Cam's more focused on the marathon and Mo is really still in that 10K groove. I think if both athletes are at the top of their 10K game, Mo will win. That being said, there is like a bit of, there's that on ramp, off ramp, like the overpass at Ottawa that Mo, I don't think has run a non-track race for like 8 years. So Cam's got the road sort of chops that might play into like a road race, because track is so calculated. If you're going a second too fast, and what that means relative to like an energy expenditure, but you don't have that feedback when you have a hilly turny. It's not hilly course, but there are a couple hills and turns, right? So that puts it a bit more on the even playing field. But I'll still go with Mo, but it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, we're gonna be in person watching that. I'm excited to see it pan out next week.
Yeah, I'm really jealous. I wish I was there. I'm doing a Solomon relay at Sulphur Springs, which I'm really excited for as well. 20K, it's like 8 times 20K. So I have that, and it's my daughter's birthday that weekend as well. But I have a ton of athletes racing the 10K. So yeah, it would have been really fun to be there.
Yeah, I decided not to do what you were highlighting, which is race the second emotional marathon after your first one didn't go well. So we're just doing a fun one of those half marathons where you don't look at your watch and just see what you have that day, and then cheer a bunch of people on. So it'll be great.
Yeah, Ottawa's a great weekend. I love
so fun.
This weekend.
It's a big party weekend.
That was my first marathon too. I think it's
nice. What year?
It's actually, I think, right around 2009 or 2010 as well. Might have been the same one. I was probably nipping at your heels. You just didn't see me. No, I walked the second half of that marathon, so I was nowhere near you.
I've never ran the full marathon there, so I'll have to make that happen.
It's a good vibe, but always like hot and like sneaky. It's one I'm a little afraid of.
Yeah, the heat does sneak up on Ottawa, because I feel like you kind of train March, April, May in the mornings, and you never really get to touch plus 15 degrees. And then it's just like 17 or 18 on marathon morning. And even though it's not that hot, it's hot enough to change race plans.
That's what we just had in Toronto. I was looking at a bunch of people's watches there, and it was like everyone's was showing 15, 16, 17. Chalking that up to my back half fade. Let's go with that.
Yeah.
No excuses. So Reid, for people who want to follow along, where's the best place to watch all your adventures?
Yeah, I guess Instagram and Strava. They're the two things that I guess I tune into the most and post the most on.
Well, thank you so much. This was so awesome to get caught up with you and hear all the things that you have on the go.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was great having this conversation with you.
Wow, how great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.